Okay, everyone. Rachel, are you there?
I am.
Ah,
Hi.
hi, sweet face.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Everyone, this is Rachel Zitin, a fabulous one, seriously, one of the coolest people in the world. Honestly. So Rachel and I met in the summer of 2014 before I moved over to Germany to teach. And I was, at the time, I was single and traveling with my best friend Jyoti. And we happened to be in Rome for a little bit. And we rented a space with Rachel and her roommates. And I just thought they were the coolest people in the world. Rachel's a Carolina girl and tour guiding in Rome, speaking fluent Italian. And one of my favorite memories when we were staying there was that there's a big thunderstorm and we were all hanging out in like shorts and tank tops and eating figs and cheese. And I'm just like, this life is amazing. So that was also the same summer I met Ralph too. So everybody talks about how people come into your life, and Rachel and Ralph, I
It
met
was
you
in
guys.
Monte, right? Monte.
It was in Monte, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, in fact, Rachel would take me to Cafe Periodico, and we'd have aperitivo and mojitos and whatever. But
It's a cool neighborhood, Monte. It's a really
so
cool
cool.
Yeah.
Yes. But so I want to welcome Rachel. Let me go ahead and pull up her bio and tell you a little bit more about this fabulous woman. So Rachel is primarily a storyteller and a lover of humans. Professionally, she is a tour guide, a writer, and a yoga teacher. And most importantly, she lives full-time in Rome, a city that has beguiled, delighted, and enchanted her since the first day she arrived. In the last decade, she has worked in many sectors of tourism, from tour guide to trip planner, to PR director for a well-respected tour company. In 2018, she pursued a lifelong dream and became certified as a yoga and meditation teacher in Bali. Since then, she has come to recognize that travel and wellness are inextricably linked, especially in Italy. Her dream is to share the joy of slow living and slow travel, allowing Italy to serve as a backdrop for people to get in deeper touch with themselves. She has spent the last year writing and teaching yoga and exploring every aspect of her beloved Rome. Her piece, Rachel, I'm going to tongue twist this. How do you say it? Your piece.
Italianizzata.
Grazie mille.
Prego.
That was published by Open Doors Review in January 2021, and it describes her personal evolution with a global pandemic as the backdrop. Her adoration of the eternal city radiates in every aspect of her life, as she currently divides her time between writing, teaching yoga, leading workshops, online and in person, and planning wellness retreats for 2021 and beyond. Everyone, it is an honor to introduce you to Rachel. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. A real honor. I so didn't get the chance to attend the festival over the past few days. Sadly, yesterday was my birthday. I guess that's a good reason. Thanks. So yeah, I just got to pop in for the last speech, Davina, that was beautiful. And I can't wait to watch the recording of everything else. And yeah, God, I don't know where to start. I will read my piece. Is that where I should start? Does that seem like the reasonable starting place? All right. Anywhere I want. Perfect. I like that you're muted, but I can read your lips, Mellisa. Also, I love that introduction, and I can't believe that was 2014.
I know.
Which means it was 7 years ago, which is
insane.
A really crazy reality. Okay, so I guess what I should say before this is it's a two-part essay, and I'm not going to read the first one. It's a very different essay, the first one, than the second one. And I'll just give a really quick background, which is the first essay was something I wrote right after the 2016 election. So it was something that I wrote in a place of shock. I've lived in Rome no, I don't think I said that in my bio. I've lived in Rome for 11 years now, 12 years, since 2009. And so the first part of this essay was a lot about just my reflections of what it felt like to be an American living abroad and how different it felt and how I'd lived abroad for all of Barack Obama's presidency. And yeah, I guess without further ado, this essay I wrote right after this most recent US election, 4 years and a whole lot less paying attention to politics later in my personal life, for obvious reasons. All right, so I wrote this in November. And it's interesting because the first essay was called On Identity. And then that's what I actually submitted this essay as well, was like a second sort of reflection on identity. And then my editor renamed it Italianizzata, which I will explain in the essay. And I have no idea how long it's going to take me to read it. I've never read the whole thing out loud. So without further ado, there's a distinct irony that I wrote part one of this story and actually never finished it. It's as if I knew all along that this day would come. Here we are, 4 years later, and a sense of relief, the biggest relief. We have lived in a world for 4 years where Donald Trump was the president of the United States. What has happened in that time? Who have we become? More importantly, how do I feel about who I have become? In my first reflection, I explained a term that had been applied to me regularly over the past decade of my life. Rachel is an American, comma, but, ... The but has been applied to so many aspects of my life. But she's more Roman than I am. But she loves this country more than we do. But she doesn't have that American attitude. Rachel is American, but she feels more Italian. There's a lot to account for writing in this current moment. We are in the middle of a global pandemic. We are more connected than we have ever been, and yet there is a global disconnect as well. My first inclination was to write this from an intellectual standpoint, a discussion on hope and change and the different attitudes held between my adopted Italians and my native Americans. Rachel is American, but she has spent quarantining the entire pandemic here in Italy. Over the past year, I have written so much on my observations of these two cultures, where they meet up and where they differ. I could easily write an essay where I intellectualize the Italian customs I've adopted and the American ones that I've left behind. I could talk about all the ways I am still American and all the ways I've become more Italianizzata. And then parentheses, Italianized is how I decided to translate that, Italianized. When I think about my beloved adopted country, I instantly have a desire to write about culture, beauty, food, wine, art, and la dolce vita. A desire to put my adoration of Italian culture into an essay that reads with the same sweet, dreamy imagery as a scene from The Talented Mr. Ripley, or the cinematography of La Grande Bellezza. I want to write it all, golden hour light dancing around on terracotta-colored buildings with patina paint and painted green shutters, the perfume of the jasmine flowers that bloom in the springtime, and the thick smell of Rome in the heat of the summer, the sun bouncing off of cobblestones and lightly cooking the entire landscape. I want to write about the sensation of living in a world that is colored like honey. This world is filled with beautiful people, beautiful art, and a language that drips off of one's lips like honey dripping off of honeycomb. My love affair with Italy has clearly grown stronger over the years. My inclination is to write it with as much rawness as I can comfortably muster. Rachel is American, but Rome has become her identity. Almost exactly a year after the 2016 election, I took one of the most life-changing trips I've ever taken. I had worked especially hard the previous year, and in retrospect, I was on the brink of total burnout. Though through working ridiculously long hours with hardly any days off, I had earned and I had saved money. That year, I visited the Colosseum well over 100 times. To be fair, I had enjoyed my days with clients from all around the world. Truly, I had. My job as a tour guide provided me with the opportunity to relish in the city of my dreams. I delighted in explaining, often to Americans, the nuances of the Italians and Italian culture, how they are, how they grocery shopped, how they congregated in piazzas, how they lived. Through sharing my love of all things Rome, I enhanced and deepened my adoration of my own adopted city. But I had burned out, a fact I would only discover in hindsight. I spent the money I'd saved and I traveled. I traveled to escape myself, to find myself, to escape reality, and to discover it. That trip changed my life. I did my 200-hour yoga teacher training in Bali. I traveled to Cambodia, to India, and to Thailand. I met people from all over the world. I often found myself torn between how Italian I felt and how American I am. One evening in Indonesia with dear friends from Rome, we went to an Italian restaurant for dinner. We ate pasta with seafood that was actually cooked al dente and creamy imported burrata that tasted like it had been made the day before. The whole meal was perfect and it made me cry. I cried because the food was so good. I cried because my Rome friends were there with me. I cried because I was happy and because I was homesick and because the shared experience of eating an Italian meal in this context gave me a deep, deep sense of belonging. Rachel is American, but she gets Italian culture, Italian food, the joy of a shared meal, and why we spent all of the extra money on the imported Donna Fugata wine from Sicily. Despite all my travels, this culture, these people, this food, and these traditions were a part of my essence just as much as everything that had shaped me in my own adolescence. Unsurprisingly, returning to Italy after those adventures felt like home. I returned to my beloved apartment and I settled in. I spent more time immersing myself in Italian culture. If I was falling in love with Italy before, now I was Italianizzata, Italianized. I had committed to being in Italy and I was becoming more Italian in the eyes of the Italians. And that's where our story actually begins. What does it mean to become Italianized? What does my love affair with Italy have to do with all of this? It is the backdrop, the setting, the scene. As Donald Trump botched America, I lived in a fairy tale of my own creation. To be cliche, that trip and yoga changed my life. I worked a little less than before. I slowly learned something I am still learning, to do nothing. I did yoga and I danced and I wrote and I dreamed and I socialized and I surrounded myself with people I loved. I ate delicious food and drank delicious wine and experienced life in Italy with the fervor of the Italians. I allowed myself to let go. And in doing so, I discovered that the Italians had been living life like I was all along. I'd been so blinded by my American identity that I hadn't actually immersed myself fully before. I discovered how out of touch I was with my own surroundings. I finally observed that Italians generally live life in the moment, something I could have explained to a tourist before, but never fully understood what it meant. I watched how my adopted culture lived their lives, how they ate with leisure, drank with leisure, spent hours soaking in the company of their neighbors outside in piazzas. I romanticized the lives of these beautiful humans and this beautiful city. I allowed my friends to make fun of my romance with Rome. They'd point out the trash as it piled high in the streets, the chaos of the city, the corruption, and the scandals. In a way, I found the flaws as intriguing as the beauty. I spent hours and hours aimlessly wandering around new corners of Rome, soaking in the colors, the buildings, the beauty. I listened to the chit-chat and the ever-present clatter of tourists and city life amidst ringing church bells and the hum of traffic. I watched life and people and began to look strangers in the eyes. I'd previously credited my lack of not remembering people's eyes colors to my lack of observing. Turns out I simply wasn't making eye contact in a meaningful enough way for it to register. Italians are very direct with how they communicate and do not bother with niceties as much as Americans do. I accepted that "ma sembri stanca in faccia," your face looks tired, was not an insult so much as it was genuine concern. Rachel is American, but you can treat her like one of us. And just like that, it was March 2020, a global pandemic. Rome went from a teeming metropolis filled with people from all over the world to an empty, abandoned city under lockdown in a matter of weeks. I watched in February as concern mounted and tourists left. I was in awe. In March, I sat in my apartment and felt the unity of the Italians in the face of a pandemic. We went into our homes and we stayed connected. Videos of Italy in lockdown made international news. Friends and family from America called me and I recounted with pride the beauty of an abandoned city, the silence in the streets, the sensation of being connected while we were all physically apart. I listened to L'Inno Italiano, which is the national anthem, with a sense of pride, and my Italian friends teased me that I was becoming a nationalist. What happened next? Rachel is American, but she spent quarantine in Rome. After 2 months in total lockdown, we emerged. We walked out into the streets in May, and I felt sensory overload at the culture and beauty and sunshine and daily life that felt like it was dripping in honey. The following months felt like being on a movie set. We smiled at each other as we passed by, united in our shared experience of lockdown, united in our fear of the future, united because we were all unsure what the changes were going to mean. Still, the city was emanating beauty. There was a sun-soaked dreaminess, and you couldn't help but soak it all in and stay present. I can't quite explain how beautiful Italy was. Perhaps that's for another day, another story. I can say that in the last 9 months, a lot has changed in the world. I can acknowledge and recognize that there has been suffering, pain, change, and excruciating growth. I can also say that my identity has continued to evolve. Perhaps before, I was not quite sure if I identified with the culture that I lived in or the culture that I came from. This year of living in a Rome without tourists has taught me that I fit into both. So yes, I am Italianizzata. But after the recent US election, I feel a little more proud also saying, well, yes, I'm American, but. And that is that. dot, dot, dot.
That was brilliant.
Yeah.
Really, really brilliant. Really engaging. I mean, incredibly engaging.
Thanks. I've been working as a tour guide for 10 years.
Wow.
As in, I like speaking. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Rachel, sorry, can I say something?
Please.
Because I'm intuitive and I just jump in, right? You're the new Emily of Rome.
The new?
Emily of Rome.
Emily in Paris.
I'm the worst at watching TV. I have the attention span of a gerbil. But I've heard that it's good.
There's a whole audience who's been binge watching Emily in Paris. And you know, I was actually distracting myself, but all I could think of was Emily in Paris, and Rachel in Rome, Emily in Paris. So I just wanted to,
thank you. I so appreciate that.
Maybe you are yet to be discovered for going into acting.
To acting, I know, isn't that, it's so funny. I feel like 10 years spent tour guiding is basically acting. It's just without any of the glory or fame. I like to imagine that, you know, it's actually funny that I read that I'd been in the Coliseum hundreds of times, or at least 100 times, because that's like the biggest under exaggeration. I'm sure it was 500 that year, probably more. But it's always funny to think that there's just thousands and thousands and thousands of people that when they think of the Coliseum, they think of me, which is such a weird thought. Like, it's not something I ever thought I'd be associated with. So yeah, I guess I didn't really prepare like anything like major to say this year. Like the essay sort of speaks for itself. After 10 years of, and I guess it's interesting, having just read that, it's kind of a funny thing. Like, I don't talk about my personal life that much. Even though it's a very, very personal essay. And it's interesting because the whole trip, everything that changed my life about that really interestingly actually came from divorcing an Italian as opposed to getting together with one. So this past 3 and a half years of my life has been this like incredible unfolding and unraveling. And I always knew I wanted to write. I've always written my entire life. I've like, the amount of journals that I will not let my parents throw away that are still in their house in Asheville, North Carolina is embarrassing. And I will actually also say, basically, did you, Ralph, say that you were intuitive before? Is that what you were saying?
Yes, my response is intuitive. Yes, sometimes I speak before I think because I just do things intuitively.
I love that. I love that. I love that. I was going to say, speaking of intuitive, so in my journals from being a child, basically, I think I was 13, and I wrote this list of things I wanted to accomplish in my life. And I don't remember writing the list, but thank goodness I didn't let my mom throw away my journals because she found it. And number 1 on the list was move to Italy. And number 2 on the list was learn to speak Italian. And number 3 on the list was marry a man with a foreign accent. So I've done all 3 already. Just got them all checked off.
Girl, we did that.
I did it. Been there, done that, right?
French, totally. Italian, done.
Yep, totally. Got it all done. So funny. So funny. So yeah, I guess really it's interesting, like having known Mellisa as long as I've known her and having respected her as a writer as long as I've respected her as a writer. You're like the person I think of when I think of writing, always have been. And it's been a really interesting, I think I just never had given myself space to write. I journal all the time, and I'd never given myself the space to publish and the space to think about being published and the space to think about, really, I think there's something to be said about performing as a tour guide. And when one performs as a tour guide, you're kind of like constantly gathering stories. And yet I guess I just never gave myself the space to write them down in a way that felt publishable. And what's even funnier is this piece, which was just published in this literary magazine. I'd sent it to my parents. My parents both write, so I've grown up. I guess I come from good writing stock. And I sent it to my parents. My dad is, to this day, the best editor in the entire world, to a point where it's embarrassing because I, not being a trained professional writer, make a lot of grammar mistakes. My grandmother is rolling over in her grave. Yeah, I sent it to them to read, and then it got published, and my dad edited it, and then it got published. And then I think I forgot to tell them it had gotten published. It was like maybe 2 weeks later. And then I kind of like forgot to tell my friends who are in the essay where I talk about Indonesia. I forgot to tell them as well, and just sent it to them like maybe a week ago. And this was at least early January that it got published. So sort of just like a funny noise, sort of a funny, yeah, just suddenly I'm published and suddenly I'm writing. Sorry, I just got distracted. Do you hear that background noise? Is that annoying?
Hey, I'm not muting. I need to mute. So it's me, Rachel.
Oh, no, it's my background noise.
I thought it's me because I'm not good at multitasking.
You're fine. Don't you worry.
I don't know how to multitask, Graham. I'm sure.
You're totally fine. So yeah, I guess questions. Do y'all have questions? Is that what we do?
Yes, we have some questions, and then we have five more minutes, and then what I suggest after that, we will take half an hour break. Because we've had to sort of reshuffle a few sessions. So, Rachel, first of all, this is actually, I think, lifted us all because you have this energy. And I think when you're in a festival, and Vito, I'm sure, agrees with conferences, you need someone to come in and kind of, create some new variation. And I think this is exactly what you've done, because we've had to cover some very deep areas in terms of writing. And I think certainly speaking for myself, you've really lifted my spirit because, I need to get through this day, right? And I feel like, I'm completely re-energized. So I acknowledge you for that.
Absolutely. I mean, one, I think you're right. The way you write is fantastic. But equally, the way you delivered it you just made it come alive. Absolutely made it come alive. The writing's good. And the way you delivered it just made it even better.
Thank you. I think that's the first time I've ever read anything that I wrote that's that long out loud, which is funny because, again, talking is one of my favorite things.
So, Rachel, moving forward, I will refer to you as Rachel in Paris.
Perfect. Or Rachel in Rome.
Sorry, not Paris, Rachel in Rome, sorry. I meant to say Rachel. I meant to say Rachel in Paris. Yes.
I figured. Okay. And it's kind of like nice because it's alliteration as well.
Yeah.
I totally enjoyed it because mine was so dark and heavy, my session, and yours just lifted everything back up again. And I thought, so grateful that you were so energetic and smiley and just beautiful.
Thank you. And I will say, I really appreciated when you were speaking and you were saying that there are funny stories as well. Like, even though, like, I really I acknowledge you for that because it's like every single thing, no matter how dark, has beautiful, funny, hilarious little moments. And so I appreciated that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so Mel, are we okay to take a break?
See, Rachel, thank you so much. I'll message you. We'll plan some aperitivo or something.
Yes. And I will hopefully see all of you in most of you are Spoleto based, yeah?
The only Spoleto based is me at this point in time. You can see the poster of Spoleto. You see? It's like the poster of the festival. It's one of the year festival. So each year of the festival has actually, Vito, we should consider that for Smart Festival as well, have a themed poster each year. And so we're based in Casale Flaminia, is based in Spoleto. And we've basically, when we had the residency with Mel and Adi Atassi and Mellisa Felix, we were sitting around the table and we said, we have this wonderful summer festival in Spoleto. But what's happening between, after Christmas, the Italians go into hibernation. and then they don't come out of hibernation until Pasqua. So we said, how can we cover this period, sort of lifting the artists? And then there's Valentine, but if you're not in a relationship, you become even more depressed, right? So it's like, so this is how I think we planted a small seed here at the residencies for the festival. And through Victor, we were able to elevate it and take it to a new dimension through Victor Pereira, through the Smart Travel Initiative and Smart Cities. So just to provide you some context, but when you go on, you know, hopefully you will be part of our journey. And then of course you will see more context around it. Yeah. So thank you very much, Rachel.
Thank you.
Rachel.